Please welcome to the stage founder of Dollar Shave Club, Michael Dubin, and Inc.'s editor-at-large, Tom Foster.
All right.
Hi.
Yes, we're here. Can everybody hear us? Am I on? I think I'm on. Okay. Welcome, and thanks for being here. I'm really glad to be here with Michael Dubin. I'm Tom Foster, Inc.'s editor-at-large. Michael, for those of you who don't know, is the founder of Dollar Shave Club. Back in 2011, I want to say, he founded Dollar Shave Club, which came in to disrupt an industry that was really dominated by one or two very large companies, and really revolutionized the industry. We'll get into sort of how that happened. Then, 5 years later, sold the company for $1 billion. So pretty good turnout for Dollar Shave Club. Sold it to Unilever and worked for Unilever as CEO of Dollar Shave Club for several years, and now has moved on and is moving into the next chapter, which is what we're going to talk about mostly here today. Over the last couple days, we've talked about many aspects of the journey of growing a company, to the degree that everybody here has grown companies to make this list. But part of that journey that I think gets a little less attention is sort of what comes after. On a journey like Michael's, there are a lot of questions now that happen, after the questions, as you come up to the point where you're going to possibly sell a company or go public, and then what that experience is like after you've done it, and then if you move on from the company, how do you think about what you might do next? All of which, he's been through and is currently going through. Anyway, so that's Michael. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for making it sound like I'm going through something.
We're going to get very emotional about your personal
totally.
journey.
You're going to hear about all my complaints.
Yeah. But first, I think for those, I think probably most people here know something about Dollar Shave Club and what Dollar Shave Club achieved in its launch and how it sort of really changed a gigantic industry. But let's spend a few minutes kind of going back through sort of how that happened. I want to start by showing a video that kind of kicked off this brand and kind of set sort of put the world at attention. Can we play that video?
Hi, I'm Mike, founder of DollarShaveClub.com. What is DollarShaveClub.com? Well, for $1 a month, we send high-quality razors right to your door. Yeah, $1. Are the blades any good? No. Our blades are f***ing great. Each razor has stainless steel blades, an aloe vera lubricating strip, and a pivot head. It's so gentle a toddler could use it. And do you like spending $20 a month on brand name razors? 19 go to Roger Federer. I'm good at tennis.
And do you think your razor needs a vibrating handle, a flashlight, a back scratcher, and 10 blades? Your handsome-ass grandfather had 1 blade and polio. Looking good, pop-up! Stop paying for shave tech you don't need. And stop forgetting to buy your blades every month. Alejandro and I are going to ship them right to you. We're not just selling razors, we're also making new jobs. Alejandro, what were you doing last month?
Not working.
What are you doing now?
Working.
I'm no Vanderbilt, but this train makes hay. So stop forgetting to buy your blades every month and start deciding where you're going to stack all those dollar bills I'm saving you. We are DollarShaveClub.com, and the party is on.
I know karate, I know jiu-jitsu and drive like a gangster when I'm coming to see you.
It's a real relic of the dark web.
So
It's been around a long time.
So that video, if you haven't seen it, has something like 10 trillion views and 1 trillion or 2 likes.
Yeah.
I'm probably a good solid, 1,000 or 2 of that.
Yeah,
of that
you
trillion.
and my mother.
Yeah. It was a revolution. Both the video was a revolution and sort of, the attention that it grabbed. And what the business, the real meat of that video is what that business did and how it was just an absolute game changer for a huge industry. So let's back up. Can you just talk for a moment about, tell us about that moment. That was more than 10 years ago now. That was what, 2011, right?
So the video launched in March of 2012. I started the company in January of 2011.
Okay. So 10 years ago, that happens and sort of wakes up the CPG world and much of the rest of the world. What were the sort of, what was the moment that you recognized that made that possible?
The moment that I recognized that what was possible.
There's sort of two things there. I think there's the moment to sort of the opening you saw in that industry, and then also there's this moment to grab people's attention and what was possible with a video like that.
Yeah, I think, so it's funny to be talking about the video still all this time later. It's a trip because, when I filmed the video, I didn't think it was going to go viral, and nobody thought it was going to go viral, especially none of the people that had seen the video prior to launching it. I mean, I showed it to my parents, and they were like, "Oh, that's nice," and nobody gets it till it happens, and everybody looks back and they're like, "Oh yeah, that thing, it was really good video." But it did put us on the map, and what it allowed us to do was cut through the noise. When I started Dollar Shave Club in 2011, it was the dark ages for the web. From a D2C perspective, the only peer companies that I can think of ours that were sort of out there making noise were Warby Parker and Bonobos, and then Dollar Shave Club in 2012. So it was noisy, but in a different way than it is now. Now everybody with an Instagram page is selling you something, and everybody's competing for eyeballs across categories. And so the video, when it launched, which was coupled with press around our funding round, broke through the noise of the moment. And I don't think people, thought about selling or talking about their brand in that way. For me, it felt very natural to do it that way because I had studied improv and sketch comedy when I was living in New York City, and it made sense for me as the CEO to be the one to tell that story versus hiring actors to be in a commercial for our new company. But we knew that the video was going to be transformative for us the morning it launched because our site crashed from so much traffic. And it was a very clear line of demarcation between the pre-video times and the post-video times. I mean, it really, without intending to be, this video really put us on the map and changed the trajectory of our business.
And so let's talk for a moment also just about the business environment that this then launched into. As you said, there was Warby Parker, Bonobos were sort of the two big direct-to-consumer challenger brands that existed. What was that moment that you recognized that said, okay, shaving, there's room in shaving, this category that's just dominated by one or two giant companies, that we can come in and change that? How can you change that? How can you take on Gillette?
Yeah, I think how to answer that. It was a big market, it was a multi-billion-dollar market, and the experience of buying that product was particularly frustrating. Those that have bought razors in the store know that you have to go find the razor fortress. It's always locked. You have to find the person with the key. That's very frustrating. Ironically now, the Dollar Shave Club's in retail. Dollar Shave Club is behind the razor fortress. That had to happen. So that's an irony for you. But ultimately, there you have this sort of very affordable product that you go through quickly, and it's not a perishable, but it's a consumable, and you use it, and it has a useful life, and then it degrades, and you need a new one. And so it had all the characteristics of big market, frequency of use, frustrating buying experience, and all of those things were just like, yeah, there's something that we can do better here. And I think that there's alchemy in success in some ways, because you could get affordable razors before Dollar Shave Club. You could buy affordable razors on the internet before Dollar Shave Club. You could even, in some cases, buy the exact razor we were selling in the early days on the web before Dollar Shave Club. And so it was really the way in which, we told the story through that video and then our other subsequent advertising that really made the light go on for consumers to be like, oh yeah, wait, what? We shook customers from their sleep and said, they said, yeah, this is a better way to do it.
So that takes off, clearly, and you sold the company, as I said earlier, for $1 billion to Unilever, which, by the way, congrats.
Thank you, yeah. Thank you.
It's a heck of an outcome. And as you said, now that Dollar Shave is in retail, it is behind the Razor Fortress
yes.
at Walgreens and Target and wherever, right? And you worked at Unilever, at a large multinational CPG conglomerate for 4 years post-acquisition. Can we talk for a moment about, that process? I guess let's start with the process of selling the company. And what were the questions you asked yourself as you reached a point where it was clear, either we're going to go public or we're going to sell or we're going to do something with this company?
Yeah.
What were the questions you asked yourself to make sure, that it was an outcome that made sense for the company?
Yeah, so there's a lot of considerations. One of them was, the choice of is now the right time to sell, and I felt that it was. There was the path of potentially going public. I didn't want that because, I've served on public company boards, and it's an incredible. I hadn't at the time, but I had a suspicion which was later confirmed when I joined a public company board. You need to develop a much different muscle as a CEO, as a public company CEO, that frankly at that moment didn't appeal to me, and I also didn't want my employees and my team to be hyper-focused on a stock price every day. And so it just didn't feel like the right move for me or the right move for the company. And so it was the timing was right. I didn't feel like going public was the right idea. And Unilever's a great company, and they know retail. And I thought that if we ever had to go to retail, they'd be great partners in doing that. And also, they have incredible R&D expertise, and they would be helpful with any number of non-razor products and categories that we might want to go into. So there was a strategic fit. They were also trying to figure out their way into D2C. And Dollar Shave Club, at the time was, one of the biggest D2C brands out there, and growing very quickly. So it made a lot of sense at that exact time for us to do it.
You build a company like Dollar Shave Club as a challenger brand to these big existing, incumbents. It's hard to think of bigger sort of incumbents than the CPG giants. You, I'm guessing, develop sort of a challenger brand culture within a company like that. How do you try to protect that culture, or do you? Is it fruitless to try to protect that culture when you know you're going to be joining then one of those giant incumbents eventually? How do you think about that?
It's hard. It's really hard. They were very good at playing hands off with us when we were still D2C only. Once they made the decision to take Dollar Shave Club to retail, we were playing in a much different ballgame at that point. The considerations are much different. You're now part of a portfolio of Unilever products that come to market at retail that in some cases fight for the same shelf space, and you become part of a much bigger internal political conversation within Unilever than you did when you're D2C only. And so simply because we decided to go to retail, Unilever, they needed to come in much stronger than they had prior to that. And that absolutely affects culture. And not always for the better. And this was all happening at the beginning of 2020, right as the pandemic was getting going. And so 2020 for a lot of people in business, running businesses, was really, really hard. So, for a lot of reasons. And we had the additional challenge of Unilever coming in and really starting to take the reins in a way that they hadn't before. But, in general, like that's, every situation is different. I mean, at the end of the day, when you sell your company to a larger organization, there's a reason they've bought you. And ultimately what that means is there's at some point they're going to want to either learn from you or change your shape a bit or help you whether you want the help or not, and that will change your culture. And that's okay. You have to, running a smaller company requires a different set of muscles than running a medium-sized and running a large one than running a big multinational one. And so if you're going to take that journey, your culture naturally should change. So I don't necessarily see it, I see it as a natural progression, so to speak.
It's interesting thinking about like what they bought. What's your take now, looking back on it, on what they bought? Did they buy your users, that you had an attractive demographic? Did they buy that you had a fresh brand? Did they buy your expertise? What was it specifically, as you look back, that like really rose to the top that clearly they valued?
I think that they bought a front row seat to a best-in-class direct-to-consumer business that informed a lot of their strategic decision-making across the rest of their businesses. That may be more than anything what I think they saw the most interest in right away. Our category growth was of course super interesting. Our business growth was super interesting to them. The potential of taking it international and into retail, I think, was interesting to them. I think, admittedly, they didn't sort of grow up with a passion for the razor and shave category, and so but yeah, I think that's what they bought.
I think I'm fascinated by these kinds of stories about a smaller organization going into a larger organization and figuring out how to navigate that culture. I just think it's fascinating. Can we talk about the leadership aspect of that a little bit? I imagine leading a growing company is very different from leading within a very, very large organization like this. And you probably saw, different structures within the organization that you had to operate within that probably changed how you worked with your own team. I imagine there were a lot of really complicated dynamics there. Can we talk a little bit about what you experienced there, that transition?
Yeah, there were complicated dynamics. What we had going for us while we were still D2C was that we were an independent company. And I think Dollar Shave Club still is run as an independent company. They do have their own CEO, et cetera. But it was run independently. However, when we made the transition to retail in 2019, or late 2018, when that decision was sort of made that we were now on that path, a different type of executive started showing up to the meetings. Heads of categories, heads of sales, heads of marketing from across Unilever. And they would tell you, here's what's important to us, and here's how we're going to do this. And as somebody that didn't grow up in the retail business, I didn't have the ability to really argue with them or dispute them. I mean, it was sort of like, you get the call, hey, these people are showing up, and it's like, okay, great, let's figure this out. So learning from, and again, you have your instincts about maybe where they're right or where they're not right, and you have to sort of pick your battles. You have to figure out the right way to translate what those executives and what those teams are saying. That's going to be crucial to your business success in a channel that they know very well, to your team that also doesn't really know those channels very well. And so, and the brand had to change, and a lot of things had to change, and that creates chaos, and not everybody liked it. So, it's a challenge, but, a challenge that I was grateful for because I got to learn the retail business from, the best in the world, and I got to learn I often say that I learned more after the acquisition than I did before the acquisition, which I think is probably true. It was tougher after the acquisition for a lot of those reasons. And I'm grateful for that learning journey, and it taught me how to be a better leader. But yeah, it was tricky times.
Were there a couple specific things when you think about like what you learned, whether they're things you learned that you want to do going forward as a leader, or things you learned that, hey, I don't want to lead that way going forward. Can you identify a couple of those?
Well, I think it's kind of like your first time through anything. Your first time through anything, you're just kind of watching and reacting, and you don't have the experience yet to say, even though you might have a hunch that something might be wrong with a course of action or a philosophy, you're sort of hearing from people that it's correct and right. And now with the benefit of experience, I might go back and do a few things differently because you know where to push and where you get better. When I said pick your battles, like you now know which I know now better what battles are worth fighting and which aren't fighting. And so I think that it's a journey that you have to take before you get the confidence to have to make those right calls.
So I want to pivot for a moment and talk about the direct-to-consumer economy. So as you mentioned, when Dollar Shave Club launched, Warby Parker and Bonobos were sort of the two giants of D2C at that moment, and DSC very quickly was one of those giants as well. We've all seen now that there are, you pick a product category and there are like several D2C challengers in it. The amount of venture capital that has flowed into, launching these challenger brands, direct-to-consumer challenger brands across every product category imaginable. I mean, it's just wild what's happened in 10 years, right? Is something like Dollar Shave Club possible today? Could you do it again?
It would be much harder to launch Dollar Shave Club today. The way that we did it, I should say. I mean, think about what 2011 was, which again I called it the dark ages. It wasn't quite the dark ages, but just the infrastructure of launching and growing a direct-to-consumer business was much less developed. Now you can, have an e-commerce website up in minutes. Before you had to kind of sort of build it all out yourself. And for the most part, there were some exceptions to that, but there were early players before Shopify. But generally speaking, it was hard, and it was time-consuming and expensive. And there wasn't a lot of noise. This was kind of like the beginning of the next 2011 was sort of like the beginning of the next generation of the web and of commerce. And so we were successful because we were at the beginning of that wave and took advantage of the opportunities that we had in front of us, I suppose. Nowadays, like I said, it's really crowded. And there, in 2011, there were no influencers. And now every time you open your device, there are influencers, or authenticators is a new word that I've heard to call these folks. And they're building businesses, and they're building, and they're doing great, but they're all competing for the same eyeballs. And maybe we as human beings have created more attention span for ourselves, but there still are limits, and there's also limits to inventory. The controllers of these ecosystems don't want them to be all advertisements because they'll lose engagement, they'll lose users. So you've got people who are creating, oil to keep your feet moisturized. They're competing with people, they're competing with the MyPillow guy, right? It's all out there, right? And so you're competing cross-category, you're competing within category, and it's much harder. It doesn't mean that there isn't room for really breakthrough opportunities. I think, the whole game of like, let's pick a tired category and, sex it up with a new brand, the way that, Warby Parker did or Dollar Shave Club did, you could do that then. Now you have to work harder. I think you have to develop better IP. You have to be more differentiated. You have to go omnichannel from the beginning. You have to really find who your core consumers are, and it's a much different
it's a much different game now than it was. So could Dollar Shave Club be successful? To some degree, probably not nearly to the degree that it was if it launched today.
It's fascinating that, as you said, the tools that exist that have been developed since then make it easier, and yet the hurdle is so much higher. Another hurdle that at least in my understanding of this, that you didn't mention, I'm curious your perspective on, is the cost of customer acquisition. So, in 2011, it was the earlier days of using Facebook to amass large audiences digitally. Can you talk about how that has changed?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean when I say there are people competing for the same eyeballs, and there's limited inventory. So you have more people competing for the same limited inventory. That's going to drive the price of that advertising space up, and which is going to drive the cost per acquisition up. So yeah, I mean that's what I mean when I say those things.
Do the economics of these companies work anymore because of that?
Some of them do, yeah.
Because the argument used to be, hey, we cut out the brick and mortar, and we can get these customers online,
Right.
and therefore, but that isn't really the case,
I
right?
think it's much harder. I think there are fewer companies doing it D2C only and succeeding than there used to be. Doesn't mean it's not possible. Again, you can have a ton of success if you've got the right product. It's unique. You can't get that product anywhere else. You've got such fantastic IP that nobody can duplicate you for years. And there's a little bit of a buzz or word of mouth spreads. I mean, that's absolutely possible. I'm just saying, generally speaking, it's harder and more expensive.
Okay, so I want to talk about this moment now. Last year, 2021, you left Dollar Shave Club. You left Unilever.
January 21, yeah.
January 21. So going on 2 years.
Yeah.
Ago. You created that thing out of nothing. You grew it to be able to sell it for a really handsome sum. You put 4 years in working with this giant company and trying to figure out how to work within that. You put a lot of your life into this. I mean, it is your baby. It is the incredible creation. And you walked away from it. And I'm curious to hear about that process, that thought process. How did that happen, and how did you think about it? And do you ever regret walking away from it?
I don't. Every journey has a beginning and an end, and by the end, it was time to go. And I had learned what I needed to learn. I didn't feel like I had anything left to give or receive from the experience. And so it was, for those and some other reasons, it was the right time. So I told them in the beginning, I told them in January of 2020 that I wanted to step down, and they asked for 18 months. I said, let's shoot for 12. And then the pandemic came, and I'm glad that I said that I wanted to step down before the pandemic hit, because then it would have looked like I was, jumping ship at a tough time. But yeah, I mean, it was 10 incredibly transformative years for me, in all of the ways that you might imagine. But walking away was not hard, because the journey was complete for me. And it's actually quite interesting to the level of disassociation that I feel at this moment from the brand, because it is so different, and it is in different yet capable hands, and other people are bringing their ideas to it. And so it's not, so the things that, your fingerprints, are there in some ways, of course, but enough time passes and your fingerprints start to dull. And so it very much feels like a different company than it was when I was there, as it should.
Are any of your people still there?
There's a few people I think that are still there, yeah. Not a ton.
Yeah.
It's gone through a lot of change.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about what you're doing now. One of the things, well, let's start with that. Give us an overview of sort of what you're working on now.
Yeah, I mean, no one thing. It's like a hodgepodge of a bunch of different things, which is exactly what I want. I spend a little bit of time doing board stuff and advisory work, just enough to keep my head sharp. Otherwise, it goes mushy.
I started a wildfire nonprofit that is doing two things. One is we're leading sort of like eco retreats into rural Montana to teach folks about the importance of what we call, or not what we call, what is called forest management and fuel mitigation. So essentially taking underbrush and piling it up into burn piles, so dead logs, trees, branches, putting them in the burn piles that the U.S. Forest Service will then come back and burn. And that's a big part of the fight against wildfire, which is a huge problem out here in the West, as everybody knows. And so we give people a great place to sleep in a great piece of property that they otherwise wouldn't have access to, and give them great food, and then they do this work, and it's super fun. Makes a great corporate retreat. It's called Safe Woods. You can check it out at safewoods.com if you want to bring your team. So I'm doing that. That's fun. We're also trying to get a regulation changed at the FAA that's going to allow drones to play a bigger fight in the role against wildfire. A big role in the fight against wildfire. And so ultimately, it's been a really cool experience to connect me to some really fun places. Like I was telling you, yesterday I was speaking at the International Association of Fire Chiefs in Dallas conference, and that was wild. And meeting these people that keep us safe and make the commitment and take the risk every day to keep us safe was cool to meet these people, and also to play a small role in helping them do their jobs better. So that's Safe Woods. That's taking up a little bit of my time. I do a little bit of creative writing. That's super fun. I've got a couple business ideas that I'm not passionate enough yet to jump off the sideline for. But yeah, a little bit of this and that.
So one of the things, we have a story in the next issue.
Oh, sorry, and democracy in America.
Oh,
I
there's
spend
that.
a lot of time
Yeah.
thinking about democracy in America right now. It's a really interesting, treacherous time that we're in right now, and we don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but everybody should be paying attention.
Small. So you're focused on some small things like
Small
democracy.
things. Yeah.
One of the things you're working on, there's a story in the next issue of Inc. about a company, I bet most people here have seen it. It's called Liquid Death. And they make water, and it's in cans, and the brand is called Liquid Death, and it looks like, an energy drink or something. It's got a skull, or is it a skull?
Yeah,
And like Gothic type, and it looks like, and they're tall boy cans. It looks like a beer or an energy drink or something. It's water. It's a very strong brand. You've invested in the company, I believe. Are you on the board of Liquid
I'm
Death?
not on the board. I'm
Okay.
an advisor, and I'm an investor.
Okay. And I find it interesting in the sense that you created a really strong brand with DSC, a brand that had, as we saw in that video, sort of humor at its core. Liquid Death is a very different kind of brand from DSC. However, has some of those same elements. It's a very strong, memorable brand. It's a real it's a challenger in the water category because of its branding more than anything, I think. And it has a lot of humor at its core. I'm curious if you can just talk a little bit about that. Like, what are the elements of creating a breakthrough, not just a breakthrough company or business model, but a breakthrough brand that breaks through noise like those two did?
Yeah, so Liquid Death is an incredible brand. Mike Cesario, the CEO, is a genius brand thinker, marketer, and he's done amazing things with Liquid Death. At the core of Liquid Death's success, in my opinion, is irony, because it's a water that looks like an extreme beverage of some kind, and probably an extreme alcohol beverage. And so when you see it and somebody else drinking it, you are intrigued. And you go up to that person and you say, "What are you drinking?" And they say, "Water." And to you, it doesn't look like water. And so you say, "Oh my God, that's hilarious," or "That's incredible," or "Wow," or you have a real reaction to it. And now you're in on the joke. And now you get to go grab a Liquid Death at the bar, or for your next party, or when your buddies are hanging out at your kid's soccer game, holding a beer water, and now it's your funny joke that you get to spread to your people. And there aren't a lot of examples of things like that. It's a really narrow needle hole to thread to get that right, where it's just right. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, right? It's not too polarizing, and it's not too cheesy. It's like they really nailed it right down the middle. And so in there's a kind of a core irony built in, and that's I think what makes Liquid Death so successful. There are other reasons other people think it's successful, and there's no one right reason. There's a lot that they got right, but anything that you kind of have to grab the consumer's attention, and you have to do it in a way that's unexpected. So if I would draw parallels between Dollar Shave Club and Liquid Death, both successful but for different reasons, I would say it's because they're always unexpected. You don't really know what to expect, and every time you connect with the brand, there's something interesting, unique, unconventional about it. We were unconventional for one reason. Liquid Death is unconventional for another reason. And it's really hard to get right because it can feel forced. You could try to be unconventional, and I could try to think of some examples of brands that try to be unconventional or do the unexpected, and it just kind of falls flat. And so it's a really hard thing to get right, but yes, Liquid Death is successful because I think of its core irony. They're unexpected, and they also and they have a really strong sense of who they are and who they aren't, and they don't ever veer outside of that lane.
We have, I think, mics set up in the aisles. We're going to take some. Oh yeah, and there's a spotlight on that one. We have room for audience questions. We can keep going up here, but please, if you have a question, there's a mic over there and a mic there. Make your way to the mics, and we will. Oh, we have one coming up right now. So why don't we take an audience question? The gentleman here.
Test, is it working? Okay.
It's working, yeah.
So really impressive, the Dollar Shave Club story. And I'm more curious about the early days. And when you started it and began, I know you kind of deal with, I believe, Mike Jones and Science and that whole group. So what did those days look like, and where were you at when you cut those deals?
Are you asking because you're curious about the fundraising part of it and when you say what was it like? What do you?
Funding manufacturing, warehousing, shipping, managing that side of it is expensive, and the funding part up to that point, and then getting fuel to accelerate.
Yeah, so early days, 2011 through March of 2012 was all sort of bootstrapped. It was me in my apartment doing the printing of the labels and the packaging of the thing and doing all the emails, and that was a special time for a lot of reasons. And then I met Mike Jones at Science, and they hadn't made an investment yet, and this was Santa Monica before there were a lot of VCs or really even a lot of successful startups, and it was kind of it was Wild Westy. There were tumbleweeds going down the street, and I was like, hey, I got this company and I got this video, and you want to invest? And he was like, Mike's one of the smarter business guys I've ever met. Never had a conversation with him where I didn't come away with just like a different insight around how to think about something. But he's also can be very casual and go with his gut. And he's like, yeah, sure, we'll write you a check. So he wrote me a check. He said he would invest $100,000. Actually, funny enough, he wrote me a check. His guy, Tom Dare, wrote me a check for $100. I got all the way to the bank with a $100 check and filled out a deposit slip for $100,000. And the lady behind the counter was like, what? I think you got something wrong here, pal. And so anyway, but yeah.
Imagine if it worked, though.
Huh?
I mean, that's a good scam if it had worked.
100%, yeah. So I had to go all the way back to the office and be like, Tom, you got to fix this. And I had an extra zero. And so ultimately, that first phase was tough. It was figuring out supplier relationships, navigating or negotiating with suppliers who were tough. Our first razor manufacturers were in South Korea. We had that relationship for a long time until we built our own razor factory in Israel, and that's where our stuff gets made now, and our Dollar Shave Club stuff. I shouldn't say our stuff. Yeah, I mean, it didn't get easier for a long time.
I guess is, it
Yeah.
was hard for a long time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
How much did you raise ultimately?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I think probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 million.
150 million.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, in the world of D2C startups, how does that compare to what I don't know, Warby and some of those guys raised?
I don't know.
Yeah.
What's the term? Navel gazing? Is
Yeah.
that the right one? I don't, I don't look at size.
Yeah, there you go. We have a question over here.
Hey, my name's Justin Lewis. Big fan. Love how you incorporate comedy
Thanks.
into all your brands.
Thank you.
We actually used a similar tone and thing in a video we did in 2017. So, was Alejandra, was she a real employee?
She was.
Was she with you at the end?
She worked for the warehouse that we started our fulfillment relationship with. So she was an employee of that warehouse. It was a contractor relationship. So she was never a full-time employee of Dollar Shave Club. But yes, she worked for that warehouse until we moved our relationship to a new one and then built our own warehouse and fulfillment center.
Okay, so I think like maybe spoken, unspoken truth of all entrepreneurs, we'd love to have a huge sellout, like you did. Is there, at what point does it become obvious to, maybe the core group of employees that have been with you from the beginning that the end goal is to sell out? And then when you do, is there an obligation to take care of them in some fashion?
Well, I think it's really important for you to make your key employees and probably all your employees shareholders in the company. That was something that we strove to do for the vast majority of our employees, is give them a piece of equity in the company. It develops ownership mentality. They start thinking about things differently. They start minding the profitability a little bit more than they otherwise would if they just were paid salary and or bonus. So I really think it's important to try to do that if you can, and give everybody a piece. Proportionally, of course. Your senior executives will have more than maybe more junior players, but I think that's really important. And so in terms of taking care of them afterwards, hopefully you've taken care of them during the journey. And so then if if your company is bought or you do go public or enjoy some capital event, that will all sort of flow through.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about some big successes. We talked about the video. We talked about the sale of the company. When you think back on that journey, and since we've been talking a lot about the acquisition and post-acquisition period, maybe focus on this. When you think back on all of that, what was the moment that jumps to your mind that was like the biggest mistake you made that you learned from?
I think what we were listening to the last speaker talk about mental health, and I think that this is a little bit of a different, maybe a different answer than what you were looking for. But like you have, the journey goes so fast, and the road is fraught with ups and downs and scary moments. I mean, really scary moments and really wonderful, joyful moments. And I wish I had a little bit more presence of mind during those early days to not be in freak out, figure it out mode, and just be like, this is really special, this is really unique. I always figured like, oh, there will be a time to enjoy it and relax a little bit more and delegate a little bit more. And what you realize is that unless you do that, unless you figure out the right mindset to be able to not relax, because it's not a relaxed thing, running a business necessarily, but just enjoy the ride a little bit more. I wish I would have found, and it's not that I didn't, I absolutely did. There were amazing moments, and I was fully present. I could have been more fully present, I think. And I think that's one thing that was that a mistake? Maybe not a mistake, but it's something that I wish I had been more mindful of.
It's a great answer. We're really close to out of time. We have time for at least one question, possibly lightning round 2 questions, but let's go over here.
Hey, Michael, just curious, when you advise challenger brands, do you suggest their marketing takes on a comedic, sarcastic tone, as you guys did so well, as Liquid Death is doing so well? And today's culture is very easily offended. So how do you sort of strike the balance of being disruptive and having this unique tone of voice? With an e-commerce business, there's a lot of data. You could test ads, but do you think like data won't give you sort of like the comedic gold because people might be offended? Like, do you think the Dollar Shave Club video would have tested well if you guys sort of ran that internally before releasing it? Just sort of thoughts around.
Yeah, I think ultimately, do I advise humor or sarcasm? Not necessarily. If that's your thing, or if that feels right for your product or category, go for it. If it doesn't, then don't. You know, I think you have to know yourself. You have to know your brand. You have to know your category and your consumer. I think the pendulum is swinging back. I think, you know, that we hit sort of peak I'm offended a few years ago, and I think we're swinging back a little bit more, where I think people understand where humor is and isn't. And again, it's not that you still need to be very careful. You don't want to be reckless. But I think the conversation around some of the touchier subjects, that the pendulum's swinging back to a more rational place. And so you know, be careful as always. But yeah, there's no blanket advice. You know, sometimes the subject matter is super serious and you have to treat it that way, and there's no place for humor.
The screen that we are staring at, you guys can't see this, but it is blinking red and yellow, and it says "Time is up" in big, big block letters. So we are out of time, but thank you everybody so much for being here. And Michael, thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.